I'm pretty lucky to have lived through some major pop culture events. The Tim Burton Batman films, which changed comic book media, the birth of Image Comics, seeing how Star Trek The Next Generation would birth a whole new fandom. But one of the biggest events was seeing how in a few short years, animation would change forever. The Simpsons is but one example of how cartoons started to break new ground in the 90s. Yet there was one cartoon that broke the world of American animation. It was gross, it was crass, it was unlike anything we had ever seen. If The Simpsons were an explosion, Ren and Stimpy were the atomic bomb. Today, many popular cartoons can all trace their origins back to an insane Chihuahua and a stupid big-nosed cat. It is undeniable Ren and Stimpy changed the face of animation. However, the story behind the genesis of the show is full of rebellion, arrogance, and sadly, pain. It's a long and fascinating tale, so put on your Stupamatron helmet and get ready to learn about the origins of Ren and Stimpy in this episode of Gone, But Not Forgotten. Before we can learn about the creation of Ren and Stimpy, we have to delve into the life of their creator, John Kricfalusi. Kricfalusi was born Michael John Kricfalusi on September 9, 1955, in Quebec, Canada. John became passionate about cartoons at an early age. He was a fan of Hanna-Barbera shows and drew them constantly. As his career progressed, he was inspired by the golden age of animation, such as the classic Looney Tunes cartoons. He wound up forming a friendship with legendary animator Bob Clampett, and through this friendship, he would land his first job working at Filmation, where he'd work on such classic cartoons as Fat Albert, Super Friends, and The Jetsons. But he hated it, as he felt it was creatively bankrupt. In his opinion, he was witnessing the death of animation. But there was someone who still had hope things could change. A person who would push the boundaries of what the medium could do. A rebel who was ready to fight for animators and their art. And that man was Ralph Bakshi. If you don't know who Ralph Bakshi is, then boy, you have missed out. Bakshi's work is historic, being the first person to ever make an animated film to receive an X rating, with Fritz the Cat, a character that was created by the iconic cartoonist Robert Crumb. Bakshi is a pioneer who broke the industry standard by hiring animators who were women and people of color. He paid animators higher wages and mentored many in the industry. He was also one of the first people ever to adapt Lord of the Rings. Bakshi had formed Bakshi Productions, which would eventually wind up creating a show called Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures. By this point, Bakshi had met John and was impressed with his talent, so John was brought on to supervise the first season of the show. Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures is considered a groundbreaking animated show because it was creator-driven. It was also the show that was the start of the careers for many legendary animators, such as Bruce Timm, Jim Reardon, Rich Moore, and many others. Mighty Mouse deserves a Gone But Not Forgotten episode of its own, but sadly John would wind up involved in a controversy with the show. In the episode The Littlest Tramp, a sequence was animated that showed Mighty Mouse sniffing a crushed flower. Editor Tom Klein thought that the scene should be cut, since he thought it may be interpreted as Mighty Mouse snorting cocaine. But John thought it was ridiculous to think that, so he vetoed the attempt to have the scene cut. This would backfire because Donald Wildman, a minister and founder of a conservative Christian watch group called the American Family Association, instigated a media frenzy. He accused CBS of promoting drugs to children. This would eventually lead to the show's cancellation. After this, Kricfalusi would become frustrated with the lack of creativity and restrictions from the mainstream networks such as ABC or CBS. He decided to form an animation studio with other famous animators such as Lynn Naylor, Bob Camp, and Jim Smith, which would be called Spumco. It was around this time that the president of Nickelodeon, Geraldine Laybourne, put out a call asking for pitches to create new animated programming for the network. John decided to pitch a show called Your Gang, which was supposed to be a host who would present a variety of cartoons, with the cartoons on the show being parodies of different genres such as superheroes, horror, and the cat and dog genre a la Tom and Jerry. Ren and Stimpy were the cat and dog here, and these characters' origins went back to Kricfalusi's college days. One night, he and his friends sat down and just began to design characters. John had come across a postcard called New York City, 1946 Chihuahua, which featured a Chihuahua wearing a sweater. He thought it was funny because he said the dog looked insane and miserable. He named him Ren Hoek after his landlord's name, since his friends thought that the name Ren Hoek was hilarious. They thought it was the stupidest name they had ever heard. As for Stimpy, he was based on the cats from the classic Warner Brothers Tweety cartoon called A Gruesome Twosome. He was amused that those cats had long noses, and he named the cat Stimpy after the childhood name of a classmate he knew from art school. Vanessa Coffey, the vice president of Nickelodeon, didn't care for the pitch, but liked the characters of Ren and Stimpy, so she gave the go-ahead to create a show around those characters. And the rest, as they say, is history. So on August 11th, 1991, the first episode of the Ren and Stimpy show aired on Nickelodeon, and the show would be an immediate success, which inspired a ravenous fan base. This series would focus on the adventures of Ren and Stimpy as they went on random adventures. These episodes would take a lot of inspiration from the classic Looney Tunes cartoons of the 40s, so Ren and Stimpy would be put in random situations, like joining the army, traveling through space, pretending to be Dalmatians to work as firemen. The list goes on and on. There were a lot of gags that were almost a stream of consciousness, with some random jokes and characters. One of my favorites was a character named Mr. Horse, whose catchphrase I still use with my friends and family. It would always involve him being asked something, and his reply being,
"Would you please take a sniff of cat box A? And what are your feelings about that, Mr. Horse?"
"No, sir, I don't like it."
To this day, I don't know why that line still tickles me. When asked about the writing process of Ren and Stimpy, layout artist Chris Savino said, quote, "John's humor is basically anything that people have to ask questions about. Like, why? If it's questionable, then it's funny to him. It's not straight out humor, you have to think about it, and that's the way he works." He later said, "John is really picky about who writes for him. He's got, I'd say, about 4 writers who are also artists at the studio. They collaborate, they go out to dinner, throw ideas around, and put it together. Basically, it's his humor. He'll change it the way he wants it, and if there's something funny, he'll make it funnier. He always goes a step above everybody. That's the way he works." This would eventually lead to the fall of the show, but we'll get to that in a bit. One of the things the series did, which was different from what had been done, was that the entire process of production went against the standard of the time. You see, back then there was something called the top-down approach. This is where you had a director who would oversee animation and another one who would handle voice actors, and this all led to tie-in merchandising. Animator and future writer for SpongeBob SquarePants, Vincent Waller, best described it when he said in an interview, quote, "This was a storyboard-driven show, which means they give us an outline from a premise after the premise has been approved. We take the outline and expand on it, writing the dialogue and gags. This was more the style of the classic Looney Tunes cartoons, specifically the work of Bob Clampett. This featured a lot of gross images that would be reflected in detailed paintings. It's not surprising that the show was like this, as Bob Clampett did mentor John when he was starting out. Another obvious tribute to the golden age of television was one of the most popular bits on the show, a fake commercial for a toy called Log.
What rolls downstairs, a motor in pairs, rolls over your neighbor's dog. What's great for a snack and fits on your back? It's log, log, log. It's log, log. It's big, it's heavy, it's wood. It's log, log. It's better than bad, it's good.
In an interview for The Hollywood Reporter, John was asked about the relationship between advertisers and cartoons. And he said, quote, "Why not go back to the old system in TV and radio, where the stars pitched the product? Have a show's writers work with the sponsors and the ad agencies to write commercials that don't torture you. Make sure the commercials are just as entertaining as the show. I did it in the original Ren and Stimpy, but I made up fake products, like Log, because the Federal Communications Commission wouldn't let you put real commercials in the show." One interesting fact that I learned while researching the series was that the expressions of the characters were based on such classic actors as Kirk Douglas. And if you look at Douglas's films, you can clearly see the influence. Another great episode featured a fake superhero that was clearly tied into a product, Powdered Toast Man. The commercial wasn't just a fake commercial though. The story also featured some clear sexual innuendo, with one joke particularly reminding me of the classic ambiguously gay duo segment from SNL. That right there is a perfect example of Ren and Stimpy pushing the boundaries of what animation was being done at the time. Another episode that was particularly unique was called Son of Stimpy. This episode was about Stimpy having his first fart and being heartbroken because he can't find his fart again. The episode was inspired when John was told to put more heart into the show. He said that if he was going to make people cry, then he was going to do it for the most ridiculous reasons. But you can't talk about Ren and Stimpy without going over the voices for the duo. Ren's voice was originally performed by John himself. He based Ren's voice on that of Peter Lorre, a classic Hollywood actor with some of his most famous roles being in The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca.
You imbecile! You bloated idiot!
You fat, bloated idiot!
Ren was a jerk. He was selfish, he was rude, and he was pretty abusive to Stimpy. He was fueled by rage, and it was always hysterical to see Ren get his comeuppance. Yet at the same time, you did feel sorry for him and wanted him to succeed. For the voice of Stimpy, legendary voice actor Billy West was brought on. West is probably one of the most well-known voice actors working today, having been the voice for such classic characters as Doug Funny from Doug, many of the Looney Tunes characters, and not to mention Philip J. Fry, as well as many other characters on Futurama. West said that he based Stimpy's voice on Larry Fine from the Three Stooges, though he did amp his voice to make it a better match for Ren's angry personality. Stimpy was simple-minded and had a heart of gold. He loved Ren and would do anything for him, although he would cause more headaches than help. There's just so many great episodes of the Ren and Stimpy show that I could name, but one of the two that stand out to me is Space Madness, where Ren and Stimpy portray the roles of Commander Hoek, a space captain, and Cadet Stimpy, his loyal second-in-command. It's a classic tribute to the cheesy 1950s sci-fi TV shows such as Space Patrol. This episode would be about Ren succumbing to space madness and manipulating Stimpy into pressing the history erasing button that would wipe out their existence. I just love it when Stimpy screams right before he presses the button. The other episode is called Stimpy's Invention, which entails Stimpy creating a helmet that would force Ren to be happy. This would drive Ren insane, as he would try to bash his brains in so he could get the helmet off of his head. This episode would feature the now classic song, Happy Happy, Joy Joy.
Happy, happy, joy, joy, 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 joy.
Which was composed by Chris Riccardi, with lyrics written by Charlie Brissett and John Kricfalusi. Looking back, I think this episode is a particularly great depiction of the struggles of mental health. Think about it. Ren is being forced to be happy when he clearly is not. Instead of accepting Ren and his issues, Stimpy just tries to force his needs on top of Ren's. I felt it was kind of like suffering from depression and being told by your friends and family to suck it up. However, Stimpy's invention is when the cracks began to show in production. As was stated before, John was very strict on how the show was written, animated, and in pretty much all aspects of production. The show, as a result, began to fall behind in production. John began to micromanage the animators. He would become abusive and tear down the work, sending back what they did that week and saying that it was garbage, and then verbally attacking them. He was so bad that there were times when animators would quit, only to wind up coming back after John apologized the next day. There was one instance in which one animator came close to punching him. The worst part of this entire debacle was that Kricfalusi would send back sequences that were completed to be redone because they were not up to his standards. Many people in production would say that he would lock himself away, working on those sequences himself overnight. Stimpy's invention was months behind, and the budget had gone off the rails. John stated that the issue was that censorship was the cause of the delays. He said many things that were approved and finished would have to be redone because suddenly the network would get cold feet. However, many people who worked on the show said that even though they did have issues with the network censors, it was John's ego and his controlling nature that was the main issue with the delays. It was ironically Ren and Stimpy's success that would lead to its downfall. It was a massive hit and people became obsessed over it. Merchandising soon went out and got devoured by the public. So the need for more content was the #1 priority for the network. They then asked for 20 episodes, and they offered to hire more animators to help with production. John said that this would be impossible because he would have to train the new teams, even though it was pointed out that he didn't have to, since many people in production could do it for him. But this was impossible in John's mind, and when episodes began to be delayed for months, alarm bells began to go off. Advertisers were furious, and the relationship between Nickelodeon and John K. had started to sour. But it was the episode Man's Best Friend that broke the show. This episode would wind up being banned, and watching it, I can see why. Man's Best Friend featured a character called George Liquor, who adopted Ren and Stimpy from a pet shop. He then took Ren and Stimpy home and began to teach them discipline. What followed was a cartoon depiction of physical and psychological abuse. George Liquor happened to be based on John's father, or rather his experience growing up in a strict household. Watching this episode left a particularly bad taste in my mouth. I can see why the network banned it. George Liquor was insane, and seeing Ren using a boat oar to beat his ass was too much. When he got pushback from Nickelodeon producer Vanessa Coffey, John lost it. He cursed her out and then sent out a memo saying that he would no longer take notes and wouldn't be held accountable for deadlines. This was the last straw. Both John and Spumco were fired. He was offered a consulting position on the show, but John refused and said that he would not, quote, sell out. Kricfalusi would also have a falling out with Billy West as well, when John tried to make Billy quit the show to get leverage over Nickelodeon. When John was fired, a media storm had broken out, and things got ugly. People accused the network of stealing the show from John.
He didn't bring Ren and Stimpy to us. I picked Ren and Stimpy out of one of his properties. This idea that he brought us a show and, we took advantage of him and took it away, it's not true. He didn't pitch us a show called Ren and Stimpy until we developed it with him.
Kricfalusi had also given up the rights to Ren and Stimpy when he took the deal with Nickelodeon. It didn't help matters when the creator of The Simpsons, Matt Groening, publicly backed John. Many press stories at the time featured interviews with Kricfalusi blaming Nickelodeon of being a greedy big business putting down the little man. Death threats began to be sent to Vanessa Coffey and Nickelodeon. It was a dark time. Spumco co-founder Bob Camp was approached to take over the show, which he accepted. He would join Games Productions, which would later become Nickelodeon Animation, to take over producing the show from Spumco. this would fracture Spumco, as many animators were forced to take sides, and Cam's friendship with John Kricfalusi was over. It's very clear that after this, the series took a nosedive in quality. The animation wasn't the same, and the stories were a shell of what they used to be. Billy West still stayed on and voiced both characters, but even with his amazing talent, it was clear the show was going to be canceled. So on October 20th, 1996, the last episode of the Ren and Stimpy show aired. But this would not be the end for Ren and Stimpy. In 2003, Kricfalusi was able to bring back the characters for a new uncensored show called Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon on Spike TV. And it was god-awful. While the original show was gross, Adult Party Cartoon was disgusting, with the characters playing around with turds, among other revolting moments. Billy West refused to voice the characters, since he didn't want to work under John and didn't think the show was funny. A majority of fans of the original show, including your humble narrator Jesse Shade, hated the results. Being massively over budget, beset with fan backlash, and advertisers beginning to jump ship when they saw the cartoons, Spike TV canceled the show, after only airing 3 episodes. The failure of the Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon does prove one thing. Ren and Stimpy was not a success just because of John Kricfalusi. In my opinion, it's the restrictions from Nickelodeon and the other animators who worked on the show and had the courage to say no to him who were the ones to keep his feet on the ground. Without them, John had no structure and no direction. The Spike TV show revival is not the only example of John Kricfalusi crossing the line in his work. The other unpleasant project from him was the off-putting Weekend Pussy Hunt internet-only cartoon, whose content was very alarming, to say the least. Years later, John's disturbing decisions in his personal life would end up being exposed. In March 2018, a BuzzFeed article was published that revealed that John had a relationship with animator Robin Bird for many years. He met Bird when she was 14. When she was 16, things became sexual between them. She would eventually fly over to California to intern for Spumco, and would wind up living with John. While this was going on, John began to pursue another intern named Katie Rice. He would sexually harass her both at work and in her personal life. John would later admit that this was true, and would release a classic non-apology by blaming his bipolar disorder, poor impulse control, and ADHD. There have also been other rumors about John that, well, I would rather not get into now. He has subsequently been blacklisted from the industry, so any projects that were in the works with him have now been killed. As for whether or not Ren and Stimpy should come back, I don't think it ever could. Setting aside the stain of Kricfalusi's horrible actions and the disastrous adult party cartoon, the show can't bring anything new to the table. Ren and Stimpy changed the industry, and most cartoons, especially SpongeBob SquarePants, have taken up the torch ever since the show went off the air. There is no point in revisiting something that was already perfect. Ask yourself this: would Ren and Stimpy be as iconic as they are if they were still on the air like The Simpsons is? Some shows have a short life for good reason. You can watch a series for yourself if you have a subscription to Paramount Plus. Well, not Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon, and trust me, that's for the best. The original show still holds up though, which is proof of the magic that this show had. If you have the chance to watch it, I would certainly give it a go. Just don't let anyone put a happy helmet on your head while you're doing it. I'm Jesse Shade, speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for JoBlo.com, and thanks again for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the JoBlo Originals channel, tell all your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We are an independent company that appreciates all of your support, and we will see you next time on the next episode of Gone But Not Forgotten.